Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. I recently reviewed the Shanling Q1 DAP. And in that review, I talked about the fact that Andy from Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio had been kind enough to send a bundle of Shanling product over for me to review. And I have to say, having previously never really considered Shanling products, I'm loving what I'm experiencing. The UP4 Bluetooth DAC I found to be better than the FiiO BTR5 version in my review. The Q1 I think is a brilliant little portable music player. And I've got two other products still to go, being the AE3 IEMs and also the little UA1 dongle DAC. So all in all, I'm really impressed with Shanling so far, but unfortunately, not all these reviews are going to be positive. And as I'm going to talk to you about now, the AE3 is where the road gets a little bit bumpy. So I do want to say thank you very much to Andy for sending the AE3s over. I'm glad to have heard them. They're beautiful, as I'll talk about in a moment, but come with me now while I explain why I don't think they're one of the best options on the market. The AE3 retail for about $129 US, or here in Australia, 265 Australian dollars. Now that's obviously a really big leap in price, much more than exchange rates can account for, but what is often the case unfortunately here in Australia, and I know others in New Zealand and various other countries have the same problems, is various changes in exchange rates, import duties, tariffs, all of that sort of stuff can mean we get vastly different prices. So I'm assuming that's why there's such a variation here, but I'm going to work with the US dollar pricing because it makes for a better comparison across the board with some of the other products I'm going to talk about. Those other products include things like the Shure SE215s, the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus, and the new AudioFly AF110s. So there's plenty of good comparisons to really put these into context and show you how they stack up against the competition, but I'll get to that shortly. Let's start by talking about what you're getting if you buy a pair of AE3s. These are a 26 ohm, 110 decibel sensitivity, multi-balanced armature IEM. They're using 3 Sonian drivers and they're in a beautiful acrylic shell with what they call a stabilized wooden faceplate. Now what I believe that means is that essentially the timber, the very fine shaving of wood has been placed inside the acrylic, which I'm assuming is what they mean by stabilized. So the acrylic's actually kind of pressured into the grain of the wood, and so it takes on the color of the blue casing but gives you a beautiful unique wood grain behind the Shanling logo. So in terms of the look and the feel, they're beautifully made. They feel great in the hand, they're compact, there's nothing to complain about. The cable's also really nice. It's a silver plated copper cable and it's got a nice sense of suppleness to it. It unravels really nicely when you don't goof it up like I just have. So it unravels nicely. It's not prone to tangling, even though I've just made a tangle of it because of how I've unrolled it, but it does come undone very easily without too much hassle, he says as it keeps tangling. So it's a nice cable, it's a beautiful looking IEM, it feels good. There's really nothing to complain about in terms of the design and the accessories that you get, because not only do you get a nice acrylic shell and a nice cable, but if I open up the case, what you also get in here is a set of ear tips for 2 different sounds. So on the right hand side here we've got the balance sound, and on the left side here we've got the vocal sound. So the idea is that's going to tweak the frequency response of the earphone slightly and either give you a more neutral tuning or a slightly more trebly, sort of upper mids lower treble sound to bring out the vocals. Overall, I found the balance tips to be to my preference more so than the vocal tips because the earphones themselves have a few peaks in the tuning and a few issues with the tuning that to me the vocal tips just make worse. These aren't a bad IEM by any stretch, but I do think you can do better for the money. Let me explain why though. So I'm going to start by talking about the balanced tip sound, and then I'll explain what the vocal tips do to change that, and in my case, make it sound worse. going to start with what I don't think these do well and finish with what I think they do really, really well. So first and foremost, the treble and the mids from the AE3s to me is just mediocre. The treble's a little bit dry, it's not as clean and crisp as I'd like it to be, and the mids feel a bit congested, and I think the reason I'm talking about these together is I think it's because the two of them play into one another. Because the treble's not as clean and sparkling and crisp as it should be, what I think it's doing is masking some of the spatial cues, some of the information, or sometimes the silence that should be there to allow a sense of space around the mid-range sounds and give the overall presentation a much grander scale. As a result, what I find is that AE3s are quite narrow and quite congested in their soundstage. Another side effect of the upper tuning is that the resolution comes across as just mediocre. And again, I think that's a masking effect. Whatever's going on with the treble and the upper mids here is getting in the way of that crystalline clarity. Something the AE3s do really well though is their bass reproduction. For a 3 balanced armature IEM, these have incredible bass. It's probably going to be too much for some people, but I think it's absolutely fantastic. It goes really, really deep for a balanced armature IEM, and it produces a wonderful sense of slam and depth and warmth. I never felt like it was overdone, and in fact, I think if the mids and the trebles were done just a little bit better, these would be a really fabulous IEM at the price. But sadly, that mid and treble issue just gets in the way of me really truly loving them. And I'll explain why that is in a moment when we get to the comparisons, because there are cheaper IEMs that do things better than the AE3s. Before I talk about that though, let me talk about what happens when you put the vocal tips on. Putting on those vocal tips brings the upper mids more forward and enhances the treble a little bit and just makes everything drier and a little bit harsh and grainy. I'd say that for most people, the balance with the bass and the treble when the vocal tips are on is probably going to be more preferable, but at the same time I found them less enjoyable because there was now too much emphasis on the upper mids and that lower treble, which is not the best sound quality to start with, and so you don't really want to emphasize when it's so grainy and dry. Now I'm probably overemphasizing when I say so grainy and dry. I don't mean that it's like off the charts grainy and dry. I mean that because it is grainy and dry to the point that it is, you don't want to enhance it. And so that's why I found the balance tips a better choice overall. So to put all this into context, let me fly through a few quick comparisons. And I'm not going to go into depth on these comparisons because I think ultimately it's going to be a waste of time. What you need to know is that everything I've tried in these comparison tests, and I selected them purely based on price points, everything bested the AE3 one way or another. Starting at the bottom of the rung was the T2 Plus from Tin Hi-Fi. It was better than the AE3s in terms of soundstage, size, and focus of the image. The overall tonal balance was better, and really the only area the AE3 won out was it has a bit more bass. But to me, that's not a good enough reason to choose them, and I would personally pick up the T2 Plus first. The T2 Plus retails for about $60 US, so you're saving yourself $70 US compared to the AE3. Moving up just $10 more to the brand new AF110 from AudioFly, and I've got a review of that coming, and it's going to be a very interesting review, I think, so make sure you subscribe and hit the bell if you want to see that one. The AF110 at $70 US is still $60 cheaper than the AE3, and once again outperforms it. Sound signature wise, they're pretty similar, but the AF110 is a little bit rolled off in the treble, which is both good and bad in that it's a little bit smoother sounding, but you do lose a little bit of that upper end sparkle that you might want. And it's also got a touch more mid-bass punch compared to the AE3, which means it doesn't sound like it extends quite as deep from a perceptual point of view. I don't know if it does or it doesn't, I haven't tested it that thoroughly, but certainly it sounds like it's punchier in the mid-bass and maybe a little less extended in the lower bass. Ultimately, once again though, the image is more focused, the soundstage feels a bit bigger, and it's the IEM I would choose out of the two of them. Stepping up again to the Shure SE215, a bit of a staple in the market and a really great beginner's audiophile IEM. At $99, so about $30 cheaper than the AE3, it once again performs better. Probably not as strongly as the others. There are reasons I'd choose the AE3 compared to the 215s, but I think the tonal balance of the 215 was better, the image focus was better, the soundstage size was better, and again the only thing missing for me from the 215s compared to the AE3 was the bass presence that the AE3s do so well. One of my complaints about the SE215 is it is a little bit dry in the upper mids in a very similar way to the AE3s, and in the case of the 215s, it's not balanced by the bass. So you're not getting that bit of warmth bringing in from the bass like you do with the AE3, and it does make that dryness in the mids a little bit more prominent. That said, the sense of space and focus in the imaging, I would still prefer the 215s over the AE3, particularly at the cheaper price. So my final test, which in some ways was redundant because by now it's pretty clear the AE3s aren't worth the money when you can get cheaper options that perform as well or better. But I put them up against a final option in the SimGot EN700 Pro. I reviewed that ages ago on the channel and it stayed in my collection because I think it's a great single dynamic driver reference style earphone. It's not a giant killer or a world beater, but it's a nice solid IEM. At $145, it's just $15 more than the AE3, and to me it outperforms it in every possible way. The image is more focused, the bass is getting close to the levels of the AE3 bass in terms of quality and quantity, maybe just a touch less than the AE3, but it's a really solid comparison. The soundstage from the EN700 Pro may be a little bit flatter with a bit less depth, and their sound is a little bit thicker than the AE3's, but ultimately I think they're a more preferable earphone once again because of that better image focus and the sense of space around individual sounds. So as it happens, I'm really sorry to say that I can't recommend the AE3s really to anybody. I think there are better options on the market, in many cases for significantly less money, and whilst they're a beautiful looking IEM that's beautifully designed, beautifully packaged and comes with great accessories, I just don't think their sound quality stacks up. So Andy, I'm really sorry that after sending these over for me to take a listen to, I can't say good things about them, and I do genuinely love the other Shanling products I've tried, but these just don't come up to the right level for me, and I think there's better options out there. So hopefully if you're on the market for an IEM, this review has saved you some money, maybe pointed you in a different direction. I've got some other great IEM reviews coming, such as the AF110 from AudioFly. I've also got the DM8 from BGVP, which is fantastic, just to give you a little bit of a teaser. So do stay tuned, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll look forward to seeing you here next time on Passion for Sound.